Welcome to the Drawing Solo podcast. My name is Mason McKinney, and I'm with...
I'm Shay Connett, operating under the pen name CM Sierra.
And if you want to find out how to get inspiration from anywhere, make sure you sign up to my newsletter and get a free ebook that'll show you how to do so. My gift to you. Anyway, Shay, where are you from?
Hi. I'm from Scotland in the United Kingdom.
Nice. Can you tell me what you create?
I create the comic 407. It currently exists as a webcomic, which you can find on Webtoons as 407, and I'm currently prepping it for print, so it shall be available online and in comic stores.
Nice. Can you explain your comic in 7 words?
In 7, difficult, but cyborg super soldiers want simple lives.
Cyborg super soldiers who want simple lives. Really? Okay. What inspired you to create it? Why did you create it?
It was a very long process over many years. The way it started was actually completely irrelevant to how it ended up. It started with me and my friends who were playing a board game, which some of your listeners may remember in the UK. It was a Hero Quest, yes, by Milton Bradley. In that, it's a fantasy game. You're doing a dungeon crawl. You've got your typical characters, barbarians, dwarves, rangers, all that stuff. But you've got a character sheet to keep track of all the treasure that you accumulate, all your skills and stats, etc. And it invited you to make a coat of arms for your character. Now, in that, I drew a wee character. It was a bulbous head, wire-thin arms, which itself was inspired by a panel in a Calvin and Hobbes strip. It's the strip where Calvin writes his own story for his dad to read him as a bedtime story. And it's all about this wee kid, of course him, getting revenge on his horrible, abusive father, who he locks in the basement and he has to stay there eating gruel and worms for the rest of his life. And he drew it, he illustrated it, and the character looked kind of like what I did for my coat of arms. A bulbous head, big round eyes, a downturned mouth, and wire-thin arms. And that's how it started. It was just a daft little sketch. But later on, I fleshed out that particular image, and I used it as a hit location template for an RPG that my friends and I were playing a couple of years later. And because it was a sci-fi game we were playing, and it has kind of like a cyber goth stylish to it, I gave that character a jacket, a long coat, and I fleshed out the rest of his body so you saw what the rest of him looked like. And I gave him a heavy pistol in his hand for the hit location template, just to make it look more appropriate to the setting. And as I started using that character more and more, I did it from different angles to say, like, here's your hit location template when you're shooting face on. Here it is from the side. Here it is from behind cover. And then I started thinking, maybe I could put this character in more and more situations. And I started thinking of a background story for him and what he might actually be. And over the years, I was just thinking, but not really drawing much. And I started thinking about what this character would look like. And then I thought that this head that he's got, this bulbous head with the big round eyes, would be like a helmet. And inside there's a real person, but it's constrained. And the mask that he has on the outside is like what he's showing to everyone, but on the inside is something very, very different. And he seemed like a very tragic character, but I thought over time, maybe it's a bit too tragic, and I thought, what would it be like if he takes off this helmet and he's suddenly unconstrained and he starts to enjoy life a bit more? He can feel the wind in his face, he can experience things, smell things, taste things. He become a bit more happier. And then I thought, it's an interesting contrast, but the version of him when he had the mask off was so much more interesting than when he had the mask on. So I thought, let's ditch this mask idea entirely and keep the mask off. So then we're left with a character which I have now in the story. I gave him a proper looking body. It's no longer wire-thin limbs. There's a very, very crude cybernetic body, is how I imagined it. But then I made it proper. I made it just like he looks like a regular humanoid. And he had a few interests. I decided to project onto this character a few of the interests that I had at the time. So my character is a professional b-boy, whereas I was amateur. I just did it myself as part of working out because I genuinely enjoyed dancing. And that made him quite interesting because it's something that I don't often see in comics, pastimes like that related to dancing. Certainly not b-boys. I don't think I've ever seen a b-boy character. You see characters in fighting manga and comics like who do capoeira, which is a big influence on breakdancing, but none who are specifically b-boys that I found. And when I always had my best brainstorming sessions when I was driving to and from work, and I'd be listening to music, and it's kind of music that you can dance to, and that helped form the character because I had those kind of rhythms in my head, those kind of images, and it started to filter more into this character and their outlook, and thus the character KZ407 was born.
Okay, I get that. What draws you to the role-playing style of games?
I think it's because I've been reading fantasy and sci-fi books for near enough my entire life. I've always been very interested in them, and when I'm reading them as a child, you can't help but sometimes project yourself into the story and think, now what would I do if I was in this situation? And so from there, it was just a logical progression, thinking, what would I do? And then you can create stories for role-playing games and the like when you start to think and are able to act it out on the tabletop with your friends. Here's the situation, here's the world, and here's how I will interact with it. I've got a story to follow, here is how I will follow this story. And you start to construct more and more characters as you do so. And playing role-playing games is a great way to get into writing, because it makes you think in all sorts of different ways, like different characters' personalities, how they interact with the world, and how you see the world. If you're a GM, which I am most of the time, for role-playing games, you have to be able to construct a mental image for your players and describe it. You want them to be able to see what you see in your head. The only way you can do that is with good, proper description. So if you can do that in a game, you can do it in a story. You can do it written down, or you can do it in a comic book. Instead of just using words, you've now got pictures. And as everyone knows, a picture is worth 1,000 words.
How would you say, is it difficult for you to transfer your experiences from a DM to making a narration of a comic? Like, how is that experience transferring from one skill to another?
It's very, very natural, because I don't do the art yet. I hope to some point. I just don't have enough time to put all the practice in necessary, but I work with an artist. He's a very good artist, and my job as the writer is to project the story in such a way and write it down so that it's easy for the artist to follow, so that they can see what I see. And the way you do that is in the form of a script. You have to write the script for the comic, even if you're just doing it for yourself. If you're both the writer and the artist, sometimes it really helps to write it down in the form of a script, in the way that a GM would describe a game to his friends. Like, you have to describe the world, the atmosphere, what the buildings look like, the emotions that the people involved are feeling. Because if you can describe the emotions to your artist, or even to yourself, just to solidify it in your mind, you'll be able to draw it a lot better. You'll know the kind of expressions they might have, and the kind of attitude your character is projecting.
Okay. How would you imagine the audience, their experience from the world that you illustrate? How would you imagine, like, their transferring that experience from people on a table? Do you think it'll be the same experience, the same outcome from having that face-to-face or call experience, peer-to-peer call experience, from telling a story from one end of the table to forever on a piece of paper? Are you... Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're getting at. No worries. It can be difficult. It can be really difficult, especially, well, the way I do things anyway. I tend not to like running a game online, because if I'm the GM and I'm constructing the story and I'm trying to get everyone into the right mindset, the same one that I have, and see everything that I see, I prefer to do it in person, so that I can essentially dominate the airwaves. It's like, before we started doing this, we have to make sure that all the other apps are closed. We're not playing games in the background, so our attention is always focused.
Absolutely.
If I'm running a game online, I cannot guarantee that all the players are going to do that. They might get distracted. They might have Facebook up. They might be looking at Twitter or watching a video on YouTube with the sound off, and they might get a little bit distracted. But if they're at the table in front of me, I'm able to capture their attention. I'll be able to gesture. I like using music. I love using music for atmosphere. And of course, you can't project music in a comic. You can offer listening suggestions if you want at the start of a chapter. Say, recommended listening, and give a bunch of tracks that you like to use for the right atmosphere.
That's a very good idea.
There's a guy who did that. It's what was his name? I know a guy who's an author. What is he? Josh Hill. Joshua Hill is an author. I haven't read his books yet, but his brother is sadly no longer with us. He wrote a very good book.
Can you describe the book?
I'm trying to find the title for it. It's been a while since I've listened to it, because I got it on Audible. I never bought the physical version, but I bought it on Audible. It involves some of the same themes that I use in my story. It involves cyborgs, artificial intelligence, but mostly about artificial intelligence. That's what it's called, Sakura Intellectual Property. It's all about a Vocaloid who has some issues with her programming, should we say. I don't want to give away too much, but it's all the chapters have recommended listening at the start of each chapter, because her career as a Vocaloid, of course, is singing. And she's into heavy metal, all that kind of stuff, with really good, solid music. And at the start of every chapter, it gives recommended listening, and it helps get you into the right emotional state for what's going on in the chapter, be it combat, be it comedy, be it some other tense things that can happen. Again, I don't want to give away too much, but he had recommended listening, and I thought that was a great idea.
A lot of that experiences are bleeding through, because you want the reader to feel like you're in the room with them, like explaining that narrative, and with all of the vibe that comes with being face to face in a DM situation.
Yes,
that's really amazing. I like that. I like that a lot.
Good. Glad to hear it. Well, I think I meandered a wee bit there. I did, because I plucked somebody else's property. but yeah, so the way I would do it, so you can't capture, you can't gesticulate in front of them, you can't wave your arms around and put on an accent. You've got to get them in with good art. Now, the art doesn't need to be exceptional. Not everyone is brilliant at art, but as long as you can convey what it is you're trying to project, then that's the most important thing. So with what I do, there has to be a lot of movement for if there's dancing or combat, and it has to be quite visceral. And with the backgrounds as well, depending on what happens, because most of my settings are dystopias. I just like dystopias. There's really dark ones, and there's some that can be quite humorous. I try to bridge the gap between those. Everything's typically quite dark, but with elements of humor, and the artwork is what helps project that. Not just in the style of it, but also the kind of things that are there, like the kind of words that are on billboards, the images, the kind of clothing that people wear in the background.
Right.
All that sort of stuff will help get their attention and get them more invested in the world.
So you find the mix between humor and dark reality more enticing to your sensibilities?
Oh yes.
Can you explain on that a little bit further? Like why? Can you explain on why you gravitate more to that style of setting?
Right. Because sometimes things can get a little bit too dark, and that can make the reader feel miserable. Like when I said there's some really dark dystopias and some funny ones, there's the perfect example for the worst, darkest dystopia I can think of is 1984. If you ever read the novel or even seen the movie,
oh yeah, that was required reading
dystopia.
when I was in high school. Yes.
Really, that's interesting. We weren't allowed to read that one. We didn't even get the option. We weren't told anything about it. I didn't find it out until years and years later. But it's a great book. It's a very good book, but frightening. Yeah. It's really dark.
Absolutely, yeah. we read it, and then after we read the book, we watched the movie, had to write essays about dystopia, like censorship and all that. It's
Yeah.
that was. I'm just now remembering that. That's crazy.
I wish we had that, because I would have loved to write about that. It probably would have made me a lot more interested and maybe a better writer as well if I could analyze stuff like that.
Oh man.
So, yeah, that's a dark one. That's
Yeah.
a really dark, horrible one.
But
On the other end,
yeah.
ones that have more humor are dystopias like 2000 AD's Mega City 1. It's a bit of a dystopia. It's a corporate dystopia, but it has elements of humor because it takes things that happen in our world and it twists them to make them a bit more exaggerated, to make them a bit crazier. And it's still a dark place. You wouldn't want to live there, but reading about it can sometimes be very interesting. In fact, I'm in the process of reading a novel which was produced by the company Games Workshop years and years ago, but I've got a more recent printing of it for their game, which is long since out of production, Dark Future. Dark Future is brilliant. It started life as a game all about car combat, but with obvious influence from Mad Max, but it's set in like a corporate dystopia. It's not just called Dark Future, it presents itself as the Dark Future. It's our future, but a corporate hellhole. Everything is run by corporations, but it has a lot of humor in there all the same. Like the novel, this one in particular, is called Route 666. And it's the history of it goes all the way back to the Wild West. That's where the story really starts. But it's all about cults, summoning demons. There might be some links to the Cthulhu mythos, but there's guys all throughout the story who have existed in America for centuries. They've got this long-term plan of summoning these dark gods to the material plane. And one guy that it follows, part of his plan in doing that is offering sacrifices all across the centuries to his gods. And what they like the most for sacrifices is human potential, wasted, cut off. So the way he does that is he finds artists and geniuses, musicians, and has them meet an untimely end. Now, it all sounds really dark, but elements of humor do still sneak in there. Like he says that over time he has found troubled geniuses and snuffed out their lives prematurely. Edward Munch, H.P. Lovecraft, Kurt Cobain, and then he mentions that singer, Presley. He knew what was going on. He saw what was happening, and he left the path of blood and gold. He's out there somewhere.
I think it's very interesting because it reminds me of how comedians can tell the saddest stories. The people who are able to make you laugh are able to make you cry, and I think that come from a lot of comedy being derived from a source of pain. I think there's a weird balance when it comes to contradictory truths. As in, like, if you want a darker atmosphere to hit harder, you need to have those elements of light, because maybe that registers to us, because nothing can be all bad, unless you're in a very, very specific place, But I think that's very interesting. I wanted to ask about fantasy or sci-fi. Are you either or? What are your favorite aspects about the fantasy, or what are your favorite aspects about sci-fi? Because I hear you're making more of a sci-fi type story, but you are involved in a lot of fantasy from the beginning of the conversation.
Yes, I do have an interest in both, but primarily sci-fi. You're absolutely correct. Sci-fi is probably my favorite because I've been interested in technology ever since I was a child. And my father was an electronics engineer, and I worked for him for a while, and he probably kindled my interest in technology. So with sci-fi, it's interesting to see the extent that where technology can take us, and you can understand how things work. I like seeing the applications of technology in various ways, be it recording devices, the potential of magnetic fields, which we're only just beginning to realize. That's how you'll get like touchscreen interfaces, holograms, stuff like that. Magnetic fields is where all that's at, and the likes material compositions, how things keep on getting stronger, the computers keep getting faster. They say that with quantum computing, like the way right now, the way information is stored on a computer is in a memory cell. It's either a 1 or a 0. With quantum computing in the future, they think that memory will be stored by monitoring the direction which an electron spins around an atom. So when you get something like that, computing is exponentially more powerful. So it's interesting to consider all these things, and sci-fi is the extent of that. It's where that is.
Right.
But I still like fantasy. With fantasy, what I like is, well, combat, really. Because I'm a big fan of combat. I enjoy HEMA, that's historical European martial arts. I'm still studying those. I quite enjoy them. And I just like seeing like knights, samurai, stuff like that. Big pitched battles with rows of spearmen and halberdiers. It's interesting. Also, architecture and the way life was.
Yes.
Craftsmen. I like seeing craftsmen in stories and fantasy stories. I really like that. And see, this is an appeal at both ends. There's like where technology was and where technology is going.
Two questions. I guess I have one for the sci-fi aspect and one about like the fantasy aspect. Well, on the sci-fi aspect, what do you think is mostly a reality that you fear with our modern technology, and what are aspects that you see in sci-fi that makes you think this will never happen?
Right, things to fear would be the intrusive nature of technology.
Okay.
It seems that everything you're doing is being monitored. Right now for advertising purposes. There's like, you can't have a conversation with your phone around you about, like, if you start talking about beer cans or whatever, the next time you turn on your phone, you fire up YouTube, you're getting adverts for beer.
Right.
When you talk about a specific car, you're suddenly getting car adverts. It is quite intrusive, and I really don't like that. It could have been worse. It could have been much worse, but in sci-fi and fiction, where it usually happens that whenever you read like sci-fi dystopias, like I said, sometimes are pretty bad, and that's the worst extent of it. But that's like all the bad stuff to get there has already happened. But I find that in real life, when you see something that's a bit too intrusive or something that seems really, really crazy technology-wise, people on the whole will generally push back against it. Like a good example of that would be the Xbox One or the Xbox 360. I can't remember when this came out. It might have been the 360 when they wanted that the Kinect.
Oh yeah, I remember that was the Xbox One when that rolled out. Microsoft said that it has to be online all the time, and you cannot share any games with your friends. That's right. It was insane.
It could have been worse. One of the other plans they had was that, you'll be able to watch movies with your friends because it was no longer a games console. This was now an entire lifestyle system. This would help you with life in general. But with the Kinect, as they originally had it, you didn't have a choice. You were going to get a Kinect whether you liked it or not. You want an Xbox One, you're going to get a Kinect. There's nothing you can do about that. And one of the ideas was that if you had your friends around and you're watching a movie, you rented a movie. It used to be, if you want to rent a movie, just go out and rent the damn thing and watch it. But now, with the Kinect, because it's got all the cameras, it would scan your room and see just how many of your friends you have with you and charge you per person who is watching.
That was in the that was planned?
Yeah.
That's insane. That is insane. I guess you're right. It could always be worse. It could absolutely always be worse.
But no, thankfully people pushed back against it, and consumers on the whole said, "No, fuck this! I don't want this."
Oh my
and they had to go back in a decision. Originally, they said, "You're getting a Kinect; it's bundled with it." But then eventually, they had to admit, "Nah, nobody wants this. That we're not going to do the Kinect with it anymore. If you want a Kinect, you can buy one, but it's not bundled with the Xbox anymore." So good.
How do you feel about? I remember there was like news. There's probably old news, and Walmart and all these other major retailers probably stepped back. But I remember there was a scare recently, probably like last month, that a lot of major retailers were no longer manufacturing physical video game discs, since a lot of consoles nowadays are really pushing for digital only, consoles.
Yes.
Would you see that is like another step closer to a dystopian future, at least for entertainment and archival reasons?
Yes. Possibly. Yes. There is that saying that's been going around. I don't know how true it is. It's part of a conspiracy, I know, but
Oh, yeah.
it's the edict that comes from on high is that you shall own nothing and be happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're getting your digital copies of games, that's not, you don't own that. You just have the right to play it. So at any point, the guys that produce it, they can change something in there. I mean, we've already seen that in movies. Like if you're watching movies on Disney Plus or whatever, sometimes they'll feel that a section of a movie might be too problematic for today's sensibility, so they'll edit it out. But if you own the piece of physical media, if you own the discs, then you've got that forever. No one can change that.
When I heard that, at first I was reactionary and I was like, wow, this is all bad. But then I had to take a step back and think about how people play retro, how the majority of people play retro games today, and that's through emulation, and that is all digital. So yes, I can see it as a bad thing in the sense of everybody loves to have physical copies. Me personally, I'm a majority PC player, and I absolutely loathe the fact that we don't have physical discs, that we stopped having physical discs for decades.
Yeah.
But at the flip side, since everything is digital, it gives us a way to save it on a physical hard drive, burn it on a CD, and keep it for as long as that physical drive lasts. So it opens different ways for video game preservations or just media preservations in a broader sense of things. So it's like mostly taking a good with the bad. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there is definitely good with bad. I mean, there's convenience, of course. You know, at what price do you want convenience? You know, what you want to give up to make things just a little bit more convenient. But there's also the space saving nature of it, because computing, as I said, I don't know what the case is anymore, but they used to say that every year computers will be twice as fast as they were the previous year, and information storage will expand at the same rate. Like, you used to have a disk and it would hold like 750 megabytes, and that was your limit.
Mm-hmm.
But now you get gigabytes, and there's even better than that. I mean, disks, that's really not an efficient way of storing information. The only company that seems to have realized that was Nintendo. Because when everyone else was still trying to put information on disks, well, kind of augmented with a download. But Nintendo, with their games, they just said, well, here you go, here's a tiny memory chip. It's got gigabytes of data on there, but you don't need a big disk. You've got this little tiny chip to put into your device.
Yeah, and it reads faster.
Yeah, oh, yeah, it does. Yeah, no spinning components. It's all physical. It's all very solid state. So it's more reliable, more robust, lasts longer. So they've been a good adopter of that. So yeah, that's one thing. That's the where am I going with this? I think I'm meandering again.
No, yeah, I'm sorry. I still have like one more question, but I wanted to ask a little bit about HEMA, because that's like the first time I heard about that.
Ah, yes, HEMA. What would you like to know?
This is like, what's the break it down to me like I'm 5 years old. What is HEMA? What is the basics of HEMA?
HEMA is historical European martial arts. Mm-hmm. It's any style of fighting of any sort that's originated in Europe across the centuries. You know, but that changes. It's such a broad horizon. It can be anything from like the 9th century up to the 16th century, and everything in between up to the 20th century. Fighting styles changed a lot. Because it's odd that, well, growing up, most teenagers that I knew, anyway, myself included, had this really deep interest in Japanese history. You know, they see samurai and they're just completely taken in by the romanticism of the whole thing. Samurai, noble warriors, etc. Katanas, their styles of fighting, martial arts in general, all from Japan and China. But they really don't know anything at all about the fighting styles that came from their own country and their own history.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where HEMA comes in. That's when you're studying the forms of combat used in Europe and all the different weapons involved, which, again, is such a broad horizon. There's I've learned quite a lot, but that's useful for stories as well. Is you get your swords, you get staffs, you get clubs, maces, all sorts of different stuff, different weapons, which have the style of their use has changed over time as armor has changed, weapons have changed. It's really quite a broad horizon. So sometimes if you're say you're interested in HEMA, you really have to narrow it down to what kind of fighting in general, or what specific era, what point of history is your main focus.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot. There's a tremendous amount.
You are so right about like when we hear mostly about martial arts, it's through like the Eastern Asian style of fighting.
Yeah.
And this is the first time I've heard about it. Maybe it's because I haven't sought it out, or but maybe the Eastern style of martial arts had like a lot more push in like American circles or just worldwide. But this is you learn something new every day. You absolutely learn something new. So
Oh yeah, always.
this question was meant to be for us to get into like an open conversation, but I guess that that happened a lot sooner than I thought. But
Oh, always does.
yeah, what do you want to see more of in your creative field?
My creative field is in like comics.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see. Well, going on from HEMA, I would actually like to see more knights, more armored combat.
Really?
Oh yeah, if there's a fantasy story, I'd like to see some good proper armored combat, because maybe it's in the efforts of speed. Whenever you see fights in comics, generally between two people wearing armor, wearing suits of armor, it's usually over fairly quickly. But when I see them, knowing what I know now, I can see that what's being portrayed isn't necessarily accurate.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the accuracy that really concerns me. It's how interesting real armored combat would be. Because in comics and movies and TV shows, in Game of Thrones and The Witcher, all sorts, you see people slashing at each other if they're wearing a full cuirass, the big chest plate, or even a full suit of plate armor, and they'll be slashing at each other, and they'll be dying left, right, and center. They're dropping like flies. Whereas in reality, if you slash at someone with a sword and they're wearing full plate armor, you're not going to do anything. You're not going to hurt them. You might get a few sparks and there'll be a big clanging noise, but you're not going to kill them. Wearing a full suit of plate armor was as close as you get to being invincible on the battlefield. In fact, there were some suits of armor which, for all intents and purposes, are now impenetrable. You couldn't get through them. You had to get really imaginative with how you'd beat a guy in armor. Like, I suppose Berserk has
I was about to
great
say that.
depictions of armor.
I was about to say that. I remember I was at a museum in Montreal. They had like a whole exhibit of armor, and it was amazing when I saw a piece of European armor, and I swear I could have saw it in Berserk, And it's
Yeah,
amazing. But continue. I'm sorry.
that's okay. Yes, they've got really good depictions of armor. You see some really fine-looking suits, but when it comes to the fighting, they're still slashing at each other and they're just dying.
Mm-hmm.
Now, swords were decent, but spears were actually the weapon that was used most in the battlefield because you got long reach, and that's ideally what you want. You want to be able to kill the other guy long before he kills you, and spears are good for that. They got much greater reach than swords.
Mm-hmm.
But when guys in armor get up close, they're going to bypass the spears. They're just going to clang off them, because jabbing at someone with a spear, you're going to have trouble getting to a full suit of armor. It can be done, but you're going to have some trouble. So it's when you get closer, you start using different weapons. When you get a bit closer, you start using swords. Get even closer than that, you start using daggers. Now, daggers, as I understand it, is where the real killing came in, where you got two guys in suits of armor, because they would grapple each other. It wouldn't just be swinging swords and shields at each other. You would get in close, you'd be doing arm locks, you'd be kneeing the other guy in the groin, you'd be smashing his face in with your elbow. Anything to try and knock him off balance and get your dagger in somewhere that he really doesn't want it. Up under the armpit, in the groin, through the vision slit, anywhere there's a gap in the armor when you've still got chainmail in there though, so you really have to put some effort in. So if I saw a comic book or a manga where they had like a fantasy medieval battlefield, and you could see two guys in the suits of armor, full plate armor, really fighting each other technically fighting each other, like trying to outmaneuver each other and get into a position where they can finally land that killing blow, I think that would look fantastic.
I feel like that would, yeah, I agree with you, because especially with the build up, and like you said, if you're nigh invincible, it's like unstoppable force meets immovable object, and it
Yes.
just becomes a meta narrative of a war of attrition at the end of the day
Oh
between
yeah.
two sides.
And when it comes to an individual basis, what I just thought there is like a comparison would be whenever you get like ninja manga or comics like Naruto and the likes, you see the two guys when they're fighting, they're always trying to outdo each other in terms of their technique. You know, they think they've got a technique that'll defeat the other guys, but no, he's got something that can deflect it. He already knows it's coming, so he's ready to block it. Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
The exact same principles could be applied to a couple of knights fighting, because you need that experience. You're not just going to be clanging off each other. You need to know how to defend yourself, how to block the other person's attack. But a way I thought of it earlier was like it's almost like a game of tennis.
Mm-hmm.
Because with tennis, one of the ways you'll beat your opponent is if you have them running back and forth from either side of their side of the net, trying to make them extend themselves, and when they're at the furthest end of their section and you're hitting the ball, you try and get it where they're not. You send them to the left, you start hitting the ball to the right, and vice versa. The same with guys in armor. You start try to hit them around the head, around the knees, force them to try and defend themselves at those areas, and when they think they've got the rhythm right, then you try and hit them somewhere else. Hit them in the vision slit, hit them on the opposite side where they're not guarding. So there's a lot of technicality to it. You've really got to try and make your opponent overcommit themselves. And when they've overcommitted, that's when you hit them somewhere else and hope you manage to land the blow. So seeing that could be really good. A good tense fight between two guys in armor, it can last a good few pages. It's not going to be over in just a single strike. It's going to be hammering, hacking, and finally stabbing.
What media do you think does that sort of combat right? And you would, if somebody wanted to share your aspirations with realistic armored combat, where would you go to? Where would you go to direct them to follow this as a guide?
I really don't know. In comics, I don't know at all, because that sort of fight between knights I don't really see very often. But like I said, the closest you'll probably get is like ninja fights and Naruto and the like, or cyborgs.
Yeah, like I would mean like just in manga, or like have you seen like any sort of documentaries or any sort of like books or shows that that relays it in a way that you're depicting?
Sometimes. The one I found just today actually was a movie. It was a production of Hamlet, I think it was, or no, it was Macbeth. That's what it was. It was Macbeth, and it's a really old movie. I can't even remember when it was. It looked like it was from like the 60s or something. But in that, Macbeth has a fight with some knights, and they're both wearing full suits of armor, and they are hitting each other with the swords, but they know that their armor will protect them. It's like they can take a slash to the cuirass across the chest, and they will just ignore it, just brush it off, just try and roll with the bunch, with the blow, and hit the other guy while he's attacking you. So it's like you could see guys wearing armor, and they knew their armor would actually protect them. Whereas sometimes you see it in Game of Thrones, but not very often. Like whenever you see a duel, sometimes it looks like their armor is actually protecting them, but when it comes to like a full pitched battle, very often they'll just be dropping like flies. Just flick your sword at someone and that's it, they're dead. Just possibly just in the efforts of speed.
It's just eye candy, because like the battle wasn't really the point. The battle between one person and a multitude of other people isn't really the point. The point is the narrative of the protagonist trying to overcome like ungodly obstacles just to achieve his goal. And like in a narrative structure, that's cool, but what you're looking for is something different.
I want to see the technical aspects of the combat. That's what I want.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree.
Oh, just thought of one just there. I just remembered the movie Excalibur.
Excalibur.
To look at Excalibur, it's got some great fights in it because it's a portrayal of King Arthur and his rise and his life story, essentially. It's all completely anachronistic, but the armored fighting is very good. And so when you see a couple of guys in full suits of armor, they're hitting each other with swords, but it's when they get close, that's when they're actually managing to kill each other. They're doing things like two-handing it, where they've got the swords and they're jabbing it down into the other guy's neck. That's one of the weak points. And when you see stuff like that, it says, yeah, they're not trying to push a sword straight through their chest. That is dumb. That would never work. But yeah, you still see that in some movies and TV shows. The guy will just plunge a sword straight through the other guy's chest plate. That is not going to happen. They would have to get up close and shove it down through their neck or something like that.
Yeah, like you said earlier, it's like a game of tennis, which I really like that analogy. I was gonna say something like boxing, but your tennis is. I feel like your tennis analogy is is just better.
Oh, thanks. But boxing still works.
Yeah, it still works because most people don't go down with one punch. It depends on who you're up against, of course. But the way you describe it it's way better than what I could have done. So that's in the way that you pictured it. It's you're a master DM, so it showed. So can you, since your story is a sci-fi series and you're very very passionate about this style of fighting, would you see as there would be a sci-fi equivalent to that sort of combat style?
Yes. Maybe not in that. Well, possibly. It depends on the character, I suppose. But there are analogies in there, certainly. And also by the very nature of the characters. Because the characters, the main ones, of whom KZ-407 is one of, I call the Dino Frenti 1st Gen Mod Infantry. Them being the 1st regiment of genetically modified infantry from their world of Denolfren. So Dino Frenti 1st Gen Mod Infantry. But now they're all cyborgs, and their bodies are coated, their skin is what I call ballistic plastic. There are plastics out there which harden when you apply stress. If you bend them or hit them really hard with something, they become more dense, they harden up.
Right.
So their skin can do the same. It's like normal skin. Well, not normal, it's more... It doesn't. If you're closer, you'll see that it's definitely not natural, and they have all their skin tones have a hint of grey to them. But if it gets subjected to stress, like the impact of a bullet or a heavy blow from a crowbar or a baseball bat, it hardens, and it can deflect it up to a point. So that's where the armor comes in. They will have that. They're aware that they can suffer such damage to an extent, but you still want to protect yourself. Someone made a really good point recently. If you had a suit of armor which would deflect 90% of all incoming attacks, that sounds pretty high, but would you really want to stand there and let hundreds of guys beat you up or shoot at you? It's only a matter of time before just one breaks through it, and that one is all it takes. So even though you're really, really tough, you don't want to just stand there and weather it. You want to try and get out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's the same with their armor.
Yeah, it's like that one rule from the Art of War. It's like if you're going at war, the best thing you can do is end it quickly.
Oh, yes.
Well, the best way to win a war is to not be in war. Yeah. I think that was one of them. But if you are, you better end it quickly.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
That's another way of looking at it. It's also like in most fights as well. Because I know that in several martial arts, it's all about blocking, defending. You get Aikido as trying to avoid incoming attacks. But when you look at the practical side to it, you look at boxing, you look at MMA, as you're going in there, is that you're going to get hit. It's going to happen. You just have to be prepared to deal with it when it does. And hopefully you'll be able to take more damage than the other guy can. And you'll be able to knock them out. But you're going to suffer damage, you're going to get hit.
There's no way around it.
Nope.
I understand that. Let's see. I guess I would say for the next thing is what? How do you think? How can people support your goal?
Support my goal.
Yeah, and getting your and supporting your goal of having your story come to life.
A story come to life. Well, they can read it on Webtoons at the moment. If they find 407 on Webtoons, it says just those 3 numbers, 407. That's what it's called.
Okay, nice, nice.
They can read it there. But also just, well, when I finally get it to print and get it out there, buy it and read it and hopefully tell other people about it if you enjoy it. That's all I want, is someone to enjoy what I do.
Nice. I agree. That's great. Okay, I remember the question I wanted to ask. My brain just, what do you want your audience to take away from your story?
I don't know. Because I've never really thought of what I want the audience to take away from it. I've only ever thought that because it's been such a long time in the making, I've had these characters that have been sitting in my head for such a long time, and as I think of them more, I start thinking of more of the things they do, how they interact with each other, and how they interact with this terrible world that they're stuck in. And I just want to tell more and more of those stories because I think they're very interesting, and I hope that other people reading that will find them interesting as well. I don't necessarily want them to take anything away from it, or like there's no moral lessons or anything like that. I just hope that they see in it a compelling story with interesting characters who they want to see progress, lives which are being played out, which are interesting to learn about.
It really feels like one of those stories that you learn more. It's one of those things where you see the characters do things, and how you react is a reflection upon yourself. Is that something close to that?
In some ways, yes. With some of the characters, definitely, and other characters, definitely not. Because, well, when I've been writing for games, you've got to come up with characters with all sorts of different personalities. Some of them might be like you, some of them might be the exact opposite. Some of them you may like personally, others you may find completely abhorrent. But the main thing is to have their personalities firmly rooted in your head, so that you know what those people are like, and if they're put into a situation, you know how they will react, and what they might do to solve a problem or to get out of a situation. Maybe they'll make it worse, maybe they'll try and run away, but keep in mind what your characters are like, what their personalities are. Some of them will be like you, they might not be like you, but so long as you understand them, so long as what they're doing makes sense to them, and you know what that personality allows for, that's the most important thing.
I understand that. Well, one more, all right, so one more time. How can people find your comic?
Right now, they can find it on Webtoon, but you might be able to find it on Facebook eventually. I do have a Facebook profile, but I had to make it private, unfortunately. I haven't built up the courage to make it public again, but we'll see. I might do that in future. If I do, all the links and everything will be on Webtoon. But I am also on Instagram, where I regularly post bits of work in progress and comic panels. That's 407 Comic.
Nice. Well, this has been the Drawing Solo Podcast. My name is Mason McKinney, and I'm with
Shake On It, operating under the pen name CM Sierra.
Nice. And if you want to find out how to get inspiration anywhere, make sure to sign up to my newsletter and get a free ebook that'll show you how to do so. My gift to you. Signing out.